Although it is not well known in the English-speaking world, the tale of Martin Fierro has had great opportunity in South American countries, particularly in Argentina. Martin Fierro gave hope to the people long opposed by the government and treated by corrupt officials. He became, with his legend, a hero, and his tales were repeated over and over again. Jose Hernandez himself was identified as a hero, and everywhere he went, he was idolized as the spokesman for the gaucho. Jose Hernandez published only two poems, The Gaucho Martin Fierro and The Return of Martin Fierro. The gaucho Martin Fierro, popularly known as La Idea, the departure, protested the unjust laws and social conditions that forced the gaucho to become an outlaw and led to demise of his rural ways of life. Hernandez, who grew up among gauchos on the cattle ranches of Argentina where his father worked as an overseer, committed himself to righting the wrongs they have suffered. In addition to producing this poem, perhaps the most widely read piece of Argentinian literature, Hernandez supported the gauchos because as a political activist, a soldier, a government official, and a journalist. The Gaucho Martin Fierro takes place in the latter half of 19th century when gauchos were recognizable social groups that were on a decline. In a few short years, the gaucho would be a semi-mythical figure of the past. But who was the gauchos and how did they live in this world? Spanish explorers and settlers who arrived in what is known as Argentina beginning in the 16th century brought with them cattle and horses. Some of these animals either escaped from abandoned herds and found their way to pampas, the vast flat grassland of central Argentina that expand from the Andean foothills to the Atlantic coast. The European animals thrived and reproduced rapidly, multiplying into huge wild herds that roamed the pampas, where they fed in ample grasses. Gauchos were the men of pampas who exploited these herds, taming and riding the wild horses and slaughtering the cattle. In contrast to the vigorous or legitimate cowboys, the gauchos were legal hunters who met the demand for contraband trade to circumvent what colonists felt were unreasonable restrictions placed on them by Spain. Popularly, the gauchos gained a reputation of being cunning as well as passionate and highly independent. Selling hides and tallow to European traders in the 18th centuries, the gauchos survived an almost exclusive diet of beef. They typically lived in hut roofs with straws, using cattle skulls as chairs and hides on the floor as beds. Gauchos' clothing consists of poncho over a chiripa, coarse cloth that reached to the knees and was tied at the waist with a sash. The headgear included a headband covered by a narrow-brimmed hat with a strap that fell under the chin. A neckerchief and a long knife worn in a leather sheath completed the outfit. Most gauchos were probably mestizos, descendants of unions between Europeans and natives, but some were black, some white, and some mulatto, which is black and white unions. Hernandez's poems refers to Martin Fierro not as mestizo, but as criollo. The term for a white child born in the Americas of European parents. Criollo also had a looser meaning. It referred to a person who deserves admiration. People credited the criollos with having won the independence for Argentina from Spain and for taming the pampas. Gauchos spent so much time on horseback that others spoke of them as half man, half horse, and they were rumored to be permanently bow-legged when out of the saddle. Free of possessions, they owned neither the animals nor the land they used. They grew into a sizable group comprising after 1/4 of the Argentinian population prior to the 1870s, but their heyday was short-lived. As a separate class, the gauchos existed for only about 100 years from 1775 to 1875. There were gaucho families on the Pampas, with women who worked not on horseback but as domestic tasks, raising children, cooking, cleaning, sewing, and weaving. Because of the lack of clergy on the Pampas and the expense and trouble of obtaining a civil ceremony, legal gaucho marriages were rare. Instead, rural men and women performed rituals to establish common law marriages in the eyes of the community. By the end of the 18th century, the fertile Pampas countryside surrounded Buenos Aires. Also, the gauchos were also called and being without a known father. The eastern Pampas were now divided into estancias, huge ranches that each covered hundreds of square miles. Gauchos who no longer free to use the herds as they wish were hired by the estancieros, owners of the vast estancias, as legitimate ranch hands to tend the animals they knew so well. In this period, gaucho lived in mud huts or lean taws on or near estancia land, and frequent pulperias, all-purpose inns that served as general stores, banks, bar, restaurants, and all-around social centers. European visitors to the Pampas commented on the wrenched nature of gaucho dwellings. The estancia was primarily a male world. Ranch hands were discouraged from bringing women and children into the estancias. Many estancieros hired only single men or required workers to leave families elsewhere. Some women did not find employment in estancias homes, traditionally female jobs, working as cooks, maid, or wet nurse, and these women received wages that equaled or surpassed those earned by in Martin Fierro's leisure hours. He was said to be fond of gambling, drinking, and playing the guitar. He was never without his facon, his shelved knife up to 27 inches long that served as a work, tool, eating utensil, and a weapon. Such a fearsome implement could not have softened his image in the popular imagination of the day, and the representation of the gaucho that comes down to us in literature, that is, of a wild ruffian living on the fringes of civilization. It is difficult to say to what extent the stereotype is accurate or what position the gaucho held. In this estimation of the peasant population, the gaucho and the peasant population in general were largely illiterate and did not leave a written record of themselves or their point of view, but some evidence can be leaned on from other sources. We do know, for example, that knife fighting was so common among the gauchos that the carrying of facons was repeatedly outlawed. Productive farmland in the world. Located just off Atlantic coast, the city of Buenos Aires has always been Argentina's largest and most prosperous. The conflict between the city and the countryside is reflected in two major political factions of the 19th century. The Federalists of the Unitarians. In general, Unitarians identified with Buenos Aires. From 1806, when Argentina struggled for independence from Spain, until the publication of the Gaucho Martin Fierro in 1872, Argentina was engaged in continuous warfare. It fought against other nations, but mostly the warfare of this period was internal, constituted by civil strife and conflicts with the country's indigenous people. The Gaucho Martin Fierro is a long poem in 3 voices. It begins as a song sung by the title character Martin Fierro. In the course of his adventure, Fierro meets up with Cruz, who tells his own story. The author, Jose Hernandez, finishes the poem. The first of 2 poems set in rural Argentina in the latter half of the 19th century, published in Spanish as El Gaucho Martin Fierro in 1872 and in English in 1935. It is said that much of the romantic appeal of this poem is lost in translation, and the poem goes like this. I am a gaucho and I understood, as my tongue says. For me the land is small and he could be older. Even the viper does not bite me, neither burns my forehead the sun. I was born as a child is born. At the top bottom of the sea, nades can take me away what God gave me. What the world true, I must take the world. My glory is to live so free like birds of the sky. I do not make a nest in the soil. There's so much to suffer, and nades will follow me when I take the flight. I do not have in love. Whoever comes to me with quarrels like these beautiful birds, they jump from branch to branch. I do in the clover of my bed, and the stars cover me. And I know how many listen from my pains the story. I never fight or kill, but by necessity, and that too such aversion, I just threw the bad deal and listen to the relationship. What makes a gaucho persecuted, what father and husband have been, employed and diligent, and yet people he has it for abandoned. The Gaucho Martin Fierro is an epic poem of the gauchos who settled in the rich Argentinian pampas. Pampas are an extensive treeless plains in South America. Before the Spaniards arrived, it was people of warlike nomadic Indians. The pampas steep grass supported birds. There's many differences between the movie and the novel. In the beginning of the movie, it shows Martin Fierro in a fight with the police. In the beginning of the novel, it shows him with his family. At the end of the movie, it shows him having a conversation with Cruz, his friend, which in the novel it never happened. There's a lot of differences and similarities versus the book and the novel and the movie. The novel is way better than the movie, according to a bunch of Argentinians like me and my family. I did read the novel because I do have it at my house, and I can tell you it's completely different than the movie. The novel is more pleasing to read than watching the movie. We can say it's an epic poem because it focuses on the virtues of the hero that is Martin Fierro himself, and he seeks honor through risk. His narration is objectified and linear in nature because it takes place in a daily environment. The stanzas have many verses referring to the events from the past. For example, how the gaucho lived at the time, and the poem tries to highlight the value of the people, but it's part of the gaucho literature. I do recommend people reading the novel first in English, unless you know Spanish, and then watching the movie. But the movie is completely different than the novel. This is an excellent adaptation, very faithful to the book, and despite the cartoonish but stylish and well-made designs, it kept a serious Solman tone with only very few moments of humor and comedy. The animation and the music are simply beautiful, and the voice performance were pretty good too. The movie is pretty underrated. With Martin Fierro as a narrator, it eliminates the film's potential of what could have been better due to denying access to the poems more. Although a poorly implemented narrator could have been extraordinary, annoying, and feeling forced. The protagonist is also less profound than the original work because not until after returning from war, Martin Fierro feels signs of anti-heroism that represents the positive and negative of his lifestyle. Although also the change to make him more violent after returning could have been interpreted as an exclusive character from the movie. And they portray him very good in the movie, but there's also some differences which could have been better, like talking more about the poems, which was one of the most important parts of the novel.